Okay, well, I want to welcome everybody to the second helping podcast for Harbor.Church. I don't normally get to be the one who hosts because normally I'm getting asked. And this week we had our next gen pastor, Pastor Casey. He brought the message, and Casey Prater's been a part of our church now for almost a year, not quite a year. So you're still getting used to the Cape, man.
Yeah.
But I thought you brought the word. I loved it. So I'm glad that you get to be on the podcast and we get to talk a little bit.
Yeah, man. I'm super excited for it. It's going to be fun.
So we talked this week, and I thought you did a great job speaking to the value that Harbor.Church has on growing. But your take on it was really cool, not just to be growing, but to invest in the people that are coming behind us growing. So I love that it's your heart. Obviously, you work with kids and teens, sure, and you see a lot more than we get to see. But man, how important is that for us to just be like leaning into taking the next step and then helping other people take that next step?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately should be the heartbeat of a church, just that it's not about viewing growth as a destination, but it's a constant process, and realizing that the next step for so many of us once we get it is not just to sit on it and the fact that we've got it, but to actually teach someone else how they can begin to grow and how they can begin to take their next steps. And that's when you really see growth that's sustainable and happens long term in a church.
So people who are growing are supposed to be teaching other people how to grow.
Yes.
Not just Pastor Josh and Pastor Casey.
That is true.
Man,
that is true.
Okay. And I feel like we could preach that for quite a while. But you mentioned, and I thought maybe this is something that a few of the listeners might benefit from. You mentioned in your message, how you loved Ephesians 6, and especially how a part of growing is knowing that we're going to be attacked. And that passage is talking about spiritual attacks, not like a physical go to battle, but like a spiritual battle that's in an unseen world, but that the devil is throwing fiery darts at us or launching arrows at us. This idea he's coming at us, trying to get us and trip us up. But I would love to hear you kind of just expound on that for a little bit of the people who don't really know what that means or doesn't know what that means to be growing in a world where we are constantly under spiritual attack. What's something that we should be aware of, or what's something that like you maybe you didn't get a chance to say in your message?
Yeah, well, that entire section is, when you really do a deep dive into it, it's really fascinating what Paul is talking about in the context that he's writing into, because for the people that he was writing to, they would have understood what he's talking about with these arrows, because see, the enemies in battle, what would happen is they would shoot arrows from all sides. It wasn't just one direction. It was coming from everywhere. And so that's why he says, hey, you need to put on armor. And as he mentions all the different pieces of armor, it's almost like it's something that's supposed to cover your entire body, because there's gonna be attacks that come from all sides and from all angles. And so you need to make sure that you've put on the spiritual armor that's gonna cover you in every single way, because of the way that the enemy is going to attack you.
Yeah, I mean, that's so good, because a lot of people think, I got to keep my marriage healthy. I just got to, not cheat on my spouse.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, that might be one way you're getting attacked, but what if money and your finances is a way that that Satan can distract you, or that you can be torn away? I mean, how many marriages fight over money, or over how to raise the kids, or, their work schedules? I mean, it's more than just infidelity. And I think if you're only preparing for an attack from one side, you're not going to grow, because you're going to get hit from the angle that you got to be saying, oh man, I need a well-balanced protection. I need, like you said, armor on everything. So, we're asking God, help me in all these different areas. What do you see? Let me flip it a little bit for a teenager. You're much more familiar with what the teens are going through than like what I would be, or what some of the other viewers, because things have changed in just a little bit of time since I was a youth pastor, and especially since I was a teenager. What are you seeing as far as the way that teens are getting attacked today? Like, have you noticed something maybe that some of the parents might not even be aware of?
Yeah, I would say that without a doubt, one of the biggest things that I see teenagers getting attacked in, and it's in a way that they don't even necessarily realize, is in their social media. It's not just it's not, especially with Instagram, it's not just the accounts that you're following, but see, there's an algorithm that shows you suggested things. And so it's even smart enough now to know, based on the things that you follow, what gender you probably are. and the things that you're probably going to fall to. And so I think one huge way that parents could invest in their children is just by monitoring their social media and their feed and the amount of time that they spend on social media, because the longer that they tend to spend on that and the more they get caught in what's like doom scrolling, that's when they really tend to get attacked, is in the different things that they come across on social media. And it's not even just the content that's on social media. It's just the fact that our brains are only wired to be able to take in a certain amount of thoughts, only a certain amount of pieces of information in a day. And when there's overload. When your brain gets overloaded with so many pieces of information, that's why I think we see a lot of anxiety that happens, because they're living in a constant overload and constantly being overstimulated with the bits of information that we're taking in, let alone the fact that most of what they are looking at in some form of fashion is something that's negative. Yeah,
and it never used to be that way. So when I hear parents or other people tell me like, oh, these kids these days, yeah, fine, maybe the generation that you're from, it was tougher or whatever, but you do not understand what this generation is dealing with. No other generation has ever had that. I had a principal that actually goes to our church. She was telling me that one of the things that we have to understand is the access that you're talking about, not just to the data, it's also the access that people have to you. So like when I was a kid, if you made a mistake at school and you fell in front of everybody and you dropped your lunch tray, or you misspoke, or you just did something embarrassing, man, that was embarrassing, and all the kids would tease you, but you got on the bus and then you got off the bus and you got home, and like at least it was behind you. Now, like you make an embarrassing thing, you do something dumb, you wear the wrong clothes or whatever, life is tough when you're a teen. Somebody takes a video of that and then it follows you around forever. And you don't get away from your bullies. You don't get away from your embarrassment when you get off the bus. It's still on your phone. It's still kids hollering at you, and it's still, following you around, and you're getting the tweets and you're getting the instant messages, and the video lives forever. And so you can't get past your mistake. You can't get past your shame. You can't even be left alone when you get home. I can't imagine what that's doing to change the world for teenagers today. And not even just teens, the tweens, the earlier kids have cell phones, man. I mean, the access they're getting has got to be so heavy. How do you think that's impacting their spiritual growth? Like, how is all of that access that the world has to them, that they have to the world? You mentioned anxiety. Are there other things that you think are keeping kids from growing, keeping the next generation from spiritually maturing in God? Maybe it's not cell phones, maybe it's something else, but what are you seeing that might be hindering the growth in our next generation?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I see nowadays especially is that kids are just so freaking busy. Like their schedules are so jam-packed that it's like every single moment of their day is planned out, and it's
no margin left.
No margin left. And so it's like from a child, they're being trained that you have to cram your schedule as full as possible with no margin. And then those children then become adults that live lives with no margin. And now you trade out sports as an example or whatever extracurricular. Now it's a job, and you carry just such an unhealthy amount of stress. And what ends up happening is, because they've been trained from the time that they were a child to have that mindset of just fill it with as many things as I possibly can, go. God ends up just getting the leftovers, and there's no real prioritization from an early age of getting God's truth in you and who God says you are. And it's just left up to how much you can achieve and how much you can accomplish.
Which is really the Old Testament version of idolatry.
Yeah.
We don't have big stones and wooden totem poles that we bow down to, but we absolutely have things in our life that we go to before we go to God. To your point, a sports activity, some game that we're playing, a team that we're on, or as adults, our job and the paperwork and the next sale or the whatever we've got to do, that consumes our mind, it consumes our time. And if we get everything good, then maybe we'll include God in whatever we've got left over, if we have the energy, if we have the whatever inclination. I mean, how sad is that? Let me just kind of turn this a little bit as we're looking at growth, and we're looking at pouring into the next generation. What is it that you see that that some of these people that are listening, and I got this as a youth pastor, I still get it as our lead pastor. What are some things that parents and or non-parents, maybe I don't have any kids, maybe I'm a grandparent, my kids are grown, or maybe I'm single and I just don't have any kids. What can we do? What is a practical thing we could do to pour into the next generation to help ourselves grow, but then also help some of the other people around us grow?
Yeah. One of the things that I think I tend to struggle with, actually, because I fall into the trap of getting so busy, is just doing things by myself when I could very easily bring a student along with me to do that. Because I don't think it's so much about doing a specific thing or telling a kid a very specific truth. Although those things are great, that you should do those things. But I think it's a lot more about just giving them exposure to who you are and the fact that you are growing, right? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's this idea of I just want you to see me growing and see me living out who I'm called to be in an everyday setting, whether that's, just for me, if that's taking a kid to lunch, or if it's I've got to go get supplies for an event, I just bring a kid along with me and we just talk about whatever. And it's in the middle of the mundane things that I invite them to be a part of with me that I end up having some of the most impactful conversations.
That's the same thing for me as a parent. Like, I can run an errand faster by myself, but bringing my child or bringing my children along gives me a chance to have access to them, to hear about it. And a lot of parents are like, oh, they just want to be on their cell phone. They just want to watch TV. Sure. And I also want to be able to run into the grocery store and run out really quickly. But life isn't about convenience. And sometimes growth isn't about convenience. It's going to take time. You could probably run your errand a lot faster if you didn't have a teenager with you. But bringing them alongside you allows them to see it. And there's an old saying, and you might have heard it, it's not just about what's taught, it's about what's caught.
Yeah.
And it can be caught or taught. And what is caught is the things that I see, that I have exposure to. Like, a lot of kids get talked to and they're used to that. Like, they're used to being yelled at or, just spoken down to, like, do this, do this, do this. What is taught is not always the same as what is caught. I can watch you and be around you. And this is where, man, I think you do a great job of letting kids just have exposure to, man, what's it look like to be around a Christian who's older than me that's trying to walk in their faith. And that's true if I'm 55 or 15, Right. Just get me around somebody who's doing this and working on this. I think that's something that's missed a lot.
Yeah. You had mentioned it being quicker if you just do it yourself versus taking your kid along with you, for example. And, one of the verses that I had mentioned in the message was Proverbs 22:6. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he won't depart from it. And what that speaks directly to is the idea of parenting. And so I'm curious, from your perspective as someone who is a pastor, but more importantly is a follower of Jesus that's trying to grow, and you certainly have, an invested interest in the next generation, having children that even I don't have. And so from your perspective, what does it look like for you to train up your children?
Man, I don't know that there's any class of child more picked on, or maybe picked on is the wrong term. The expectations are harder for than a PK. I mean, I'm a pastor's kid, and everybody's like, well, your dad's a pastor, so you need to be like mini pastor. I'm like, I am anything but. And if you had run into young Josh, you would not have seen a pastor. I mean, you still don't. I mean, I am a pastor and I still don't act like one. So when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I was not acting like that. That isn't fair to put that on my parents. I think they did a great job, and I'm really trying to raise my children well. I think some people need to understand that you can do everything right, and that kid may still wander. What that verse is talking about is planting seeds in a kid's heart. Give them the truth so that if they do have a prodigal season in their life, there is a seed, there is a hook in them spiritually that God can use to reel them back in. And when it says they won't depart from it, it means that they know that there is a true path to come back to. The prodigal son spends time in the pig pen, but he has the light bulb moment where he goes, you know what, I could go home. And I think what we're trying to do as parents is to always sow in our children the seeds of what is good and what is right, because the world is always trying to pull them away from what is good and what is right. And we're raising them to make decisions. When they get to the point where they can make decisions without you, you want them to make the right decisions. So I think training them is a little bit of telling them, sure, but showing them is way more important. Like, what are your kids seeing you do? So I think you train your child by saying, hey, watch me. And a lot of parents are like, well, I don't do that. Let me just be honest with you. You have children, you are telling them, watch me. Even if you're not saying it out loud, that's what they're going to get. And the same thing for you as a youth pastor. You may not be their biological father, but for a lot of these kids, you're their spiritual dad. You're the only male that they're going to see lead them to Jesus. So they're going to watch how you talk. They're going to watch how you handle stress. They're going to watch how you freak out when things don't go your way. And you drive them to camp. They're going to see how you react to traffic. They're going to see how you treat your wife. Yeah. And the girls in your youth group are going to see, is this what it looks like? Is this the kind of guy that I should be interested in? Is a guy who treats me like this? Like, you can model for them. Don't settle for a creep. Don't settle for a jerk. This is how I treat my wife because this is how a woman deserves to be treated. And you can model for the guys the same way. So, and as a dad, I'm modeling for my son how a husband should be. And I'm modeling for my daughter how a husband should be and what she should look for in a guy. And I don't want them to pursue the worst. I want them to pursue the best. So that means I have to demonstrate the best. Not that I'm going to be perfect. And I think some parents try to train their child like they're perfect. I think part of training your children is also to teach them how to handle when you make a mistake. And I know a lot of people who would tell you that they've never heard their parents apologize. They've never heard their parents admit, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have said that. I think you can train your kids as much through your mistakes as you can through your successes, but your intentionality to point them to Jesus is what it really means to train them up. So don't just talk at them, demonstrate it for them. As a youth pastor, you might have seen the same thing. I had kids in our church who I would pray over meals when we would be together, and they're like, yeah, my family never prays over meals. And it would surprise me because I was like, wow, your parents are like heavily involved in church. Your parents are like what I would call like key leaders. But their parents were putting on a show. Their parents would come to church and be fake. Yeah. And the kids saw that. And then when I would hang out with them and we would stop and have prayer, they'd be like, oh, people actually do this? I thought that was just something that you said you did. And so they're going to see really quick if you walk the walk or just talk the talk.
Yeah. And I'm sure, you've experienced even more than I have about what I'm about to say. I think it's so important to understand the idea of you're planting a seed that you may not see, that seed reach being a full plant for years. Like early on for me, like I started in youth ministry when I was 18. Yeah. I mean, I was very much a kid myself. And so I'd have kids that I was investing in, that I was pouring into, and I would see them start to get it, but then I would see them completely walk away. Yeah. And so I was like, well, what the heck? Like, did I fail? Like, am I just a bad pastor because they didn't get it? Yeah. And now having some years under my belt, getting to see them years and years later, or the random messages that I will get from a kid I haven't talked to in years that was like, man, you were such a great example to me. And I remember when you said this thing, and what they're saying is when you planted that seed years and years ago, it might have taken a while, but I held on to that and I really grasped to that. And now I'm following after Jesus. Or here's a truth that I learned years and years later that I didn't understand when you said it to me, but this life circumstance happened and it finally clicked what it is that you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think that's a great thing to like leave these guys on, is the fact that there is hope. If you're struggling, if you're a parent and you're like, man, my kids walked away, there's something under the surface that could be growing and God could be working in their life and you just can't see it. Yeah. I mean, our church is filled with people who have come back to Christ or have found Jesus late in life. And I know that there was moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and friends that had been praying for them forever. A few of them, their parents prayed for them up until the time their parents died, and they still weren't close to God. And now they've come to know Jesus after their parents have passed. I pray those parents are in heaven and they're celebrating the fact that their kids come to Christ since then. But there's probably people listening right now that they're hurting because they're like, I don't see any growth in my kid. I don't see any good spiritual growth. Don't give up. Even if your kid's 30, they might, it might be something where God's working on them. And if you're an 80-year-old and you've got a 60-year-old child, you can still sow into them what it is that you hope they see. Like, still keep living your life, And I hope that's true for you and I forever. And as we get older, I hope we're always pouring into the next generation. And right now, me pouring in the next generation is me pouring into you. The fact that I'm older than you hurts me, but you know what? I got to own that. And for you to pour into teens, but as you grow, you should keep pouring in, and I should keep pouring in. And if God lets us live to be 100, we should still be willing to model for whoever's coming behind us what it looks like to be the man that God's called us to be, or if you're a lady, the woman that God's created you to be. What a great thing that God can still use us. And if people we love are far from God, maybe our testimony and our actions might be the thing that lets a light bulb go off in their mind.
Absolutely.
Dude, I appreciate your being with us. Guys, I appreciate you listening. If you want more insight on how to connect with your teenager, or how you might be able to jump in pouring into the next generation. If you live on Cape Cod or in the southeast portion of Massachusetts, and you want to be a part of a church that pours into the next gen, whether that be babies, what do you say, from birth to what?
From birth to 35.
From birth to 35, Casey is a great resource. So Casey, what's your email address?
It is kcp@Harbor.Church.com.
So KCP as in Prater at Harbor.Church.com. Send him an email or reach out to him if you want to get connected in blessing the next generation, or just come and get involved in some way to keep growing yourself. And I know God will use you to impact others. Casey, thanks for your time today, man.
Absolutely, man. It's a blast.
Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you later.